Well, hello there. Welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk to you about this crazy, flexible, ranged zoom lens that has been sent to me on loan from Tamron. Yay for Tamron. Yay for Fuji for letting other people have access to their API to create lenses. This is awesome. This is a good thing. It only helps us as Fuji shooters to see additional logos enter the Fuji X game. And this is so exciting, if for no other reason, for that fact alone. So Tamron, like I said, has let me borrow this crazy zoom lens. This is the 18 to 300, 3.5 to 6.3 flexible lens. This lens is the kit killer. What do you call that? The quiver killer, right? The single lens that does it all, sort of, or more than a lot of other things. There is no other lens in the Fuji X lineup, the native Fuji lens lineup, that does what this does. It has a wider focal range than any native Fuji lens. This lens is crazy flexible. I think I've said that now 3 times. And so for that reason, it's super exciting. Now, it's not a perfect lens, and we're gonna get into some of those details. But the too long didn't watch version is that this lens is a quiver killer for anyone who she's shooting mostly outside, mostly in kind of a mom or dad adventure or kind of sports situation where you're taking photos of your kids. This is the lens you're gonna want, I think, for those situations. Or if you're gonna be shooting on a tripod, this is crazy awesome for anyone who wants to get into landscape and just wants one lens to start out with. This is probably the one that I would grab, honestly, because of that crazy range. When you don't know in a landscape situation quite what focal lengths you're gonna want, this one will give you ultimate flexibility. You might want something with a little bit wider access, but other than that, this is gonna work well on a tripod because the aperture range doesn't matter so much in those situations. So yeah, crazy good lens for those reasons. Not perfect though. There are some cons that I want to talk about as well, and I'll be showing you some photo examples as well. So let's get into those aspects. But first, I'd like to thank the sponsor of this video, KEH.com. KEH is the original re-commerce company, buying, selling, and trading photography gear for over 40 years. Danae and I buy most of our gear from KEH because we trust them. KEH cares because they are photographers also, and that shows. All their equipment is teched and graded for quality assurance, and many of their products come with a risk-free 21-day return policy and a 180-day warranty. KEH is the first place we check when we want to buy gear, and we have no hesitation recommending them to you as well. So I've taken my time with this lens. I've logged a lot of hours. I've got some good shutter time with it, and I do have some thoughts. I haven't seen any other reviews of this. That's on purpose. I don't like to be clouded by other reviews, so that means I might miss some things that others have said. I encourage you to watch other review videos or read other review blogs or articles, not just mine, because I'm sure I'll miss some things that others have noticed. This lens is pretty compelling for lots of reasons, and I haven't been disappointed, honestly. I've loved shooting with this lens for the last couple months. I've used it as my primary lens. The only exception would be in low light, which we'll come back to. This lens is a compromise in many ways. You're given extreme access, extreme range, but you do compromise low light shooting in 2 ways. One is that the aperture goes down to 3.5, which, that's to be expected. So it's not going to perform really well in low light situations and where there's movement. Although with image stabilization, you can combat that a little bit and not have to go as high on the ISO. But if you've got movement, which when I use this lens is usually kind of in a family situation or indoor sports situation, that doesn't help me quite as much. And so this isn't a lens that I can use indoors, not just for the aperture though, it's also because this lens does struggle to acquire focus in low light situations. And that is one of the downfalls of this lens. I don't have the Fuji 50-230 or 70-300 to really compare side by side in a scientific way to see if those ones perform better. But anecdotally, from what I remember, I don't remember those struggling as much. I think, in fact, the only Fuji native lens that I remember really struggling to acquire focus in a low light situation was the 80mm macro lens. So I'm sure there are others that do as well, but that's the only one I can really remember. And the zoom lenses all seem to do pretty well from what I can recall. This one didn't. It kind of struggled. It was really kind of frustrating to gain focus in low light. And so that's one of the drawbacks of this lens. And I don't wonder if that's because of the third-party nature or if it's just something that Tamron struggles with in general. I have not shot Tamron very much, so I can't tell you if that's something that they, haven't mastered with their lenses. So the other thing that I don't like, we're kind of focusing on the negative, but in general, I do like this lens, but there is one other negative. I wish that it had an aperture ring, like Fuji tends to do with most of their lenses. They provide the aperture ring. I don't like controlling aperture on the camera, the DSLR style. Tamron, though, builds lenses that way. I mean, they're used to, building lenses for the DSLR platforms without an physical aperture ring on the lens. So it's no surprise that they don't do that. But for me, that slows me down because I'm used to having that aperture on the lens. I prefer to have it on the lens. I prefer that style of shooting. Many of you aren't going to care, and many of you actually prefer it the other way around. You'll map the aperture to that front dial on Fuji anyway, and so for you, you're not going to worry about that. But if you're like me, where you like an aperture ring on the lens, keep that in mind. It slows me down a little bit, and I don't love that aspect of shooting with this lens. But aside from that, man, I have loved having that 18-300 range in really good light situations. And so for me, this lens, where it just performs in an amazing way is outside in a sports situation. So for fathers, mothers who want to capture their kids' sporting events, this is a superb lens because you can, if you're up close and your kid's running by with that soccer ball, you get really wide. And then when they're really far away, it's amazing how far this goes. I'll show you with some of the photos that I have, example of just how wide that lens is. And for you landscape photographers, wow, like this is the only lens you need. It's super wide. That 18mm wide capability is, I mean, you'll still maybe want one other wider lens, possibly, but you could stitch together a photo and this could be your only lens you ever need. And then going to 300, like in a landscape situation, this lens is awesome. So in those two sort of situations where you've got a tripod or it's outside in plenty of light, man, this is your lens. The only thing you'll need then is some sort of low light capability lens, something with a fast aperture, maybe a prime or two when you don't have light on your side. But aside from that, wow, what a great lens, great kit lens or first lens to grab. And physically, it's not metal, but that's, for me, okay. Like I prefer having lighter materials with a lens this size. I mean, if a lens like this, if it was going to be all metal, it would be massively heavy, but this is not heavy. It's a pretty light lens, which means I can take it on in a travel situation, put it on my camera all day, and it's not going to bother me that bad. And it's also not massive. It's not the biggest lens. What can I compare it to? I mean, it's it's a little bit longer than an X100 body. So not huge. There are plenty of zoom lenses that are bigger that Fuji makes. Yeah, so it's a good lens. I like the feel of the focus. It stays where you put it. It has a lock mechanism, so you can kind of lock it from falling, but I don't find that you need that. I've never used that lock capability. It stays where you put it. At least this one does. I know tolerances can vary, but with this copy, it goes right where I need it to be, and it'll stay there. It's not going to move around. So that's enough talk. Let's look now at some photo examples so you can see the image quality, see what it's capable of, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of the pros and cons when it comes to purely image quality with this lens. As previously mentioned, this lens shines in sunny situations. I used it as my only lens at our Thanksgiving extended family get-together and was extremely pleased with the photos taken out of doors. It works great for portraiture, though of course doesn't exhibit the extreme shallow depth of field that some portrait photographers are obsessed with. Still, I was very pleased with the color rendering and sharpness. In well-lit adventure settings, it does okay. It's not the fastest focusing lens for Fuji, but it is way more than adequate and is partly the sacrifice you make for the extreme range. Worth it for boating situations where you can shoot wide or extremely narrow with one weather-sealed lens. Here is an example of how extreme the range is, shot from somewhere between 100 and 200 yards away from our crazy cliff jumping kid and cousin. But in video mode, we start to see some of the other limits of this lens. It exhibits tons of focus breathing, and as with most Fuji zooms, it doesn't retain focus at all when zooming. It's pretty much worthless for video when zooming. Additionally, even when not zooming, with continuous autofocus in video mode, even with good light, it just doesn't focus very well. This isn't the lens that I would use for adventure video, even with Tamron's vibration control. In a pinch, this lens could work well as a wildlife lens, though if you wanted to get more seriously into wildlife, you'd probably want a lens with shallower depth of field. In indoor situations, this lens can work if you've got plenty of light, but in lower light situations, you'll see I've had to compensate with quite a bit of ISO. These shots are extremely grainy, and I felt obligated to switch to black and white, as photos with high noise like this can start to look like trash in color, in my opinion. Covering my boy's mountain bike race with this lens worked pretty well. Again, it's not the fastest focusing zoom lens in the world, but the flexibility of being able to shoot wide, the relatively low price compared to other sports super zooms, and the lightness of this lens makes it appealing for us who hike and travel, and it makes it worth it for me. Backlit, it focused fine, it controlled chromatic aberration well, but this lens does exhibit more lens flaring than other Fuji zoom lenses. Another place this lens shines is with close focus. It has a 1:2 magnification ratio at the wide end, which is so fun to shoot with. And this lens gives you that ability, albeit with less of the shallow depth of field than, say, the 16mm 1.4 will provide at close focus distances. As a portrait lens with strobes, this lens worked very well in the studio. I used this lens to capture headshots for my kids for our photoshopped Guardians of the Galaxy Christmas card and wasn't disappointed at all. So that's all I've got for you guys. Again, great lens. Certainly one I'd recommend as one of the first few lenses you get if you want extreme flexibility in situations with plenty of light or a tripod situation. This is a great lens, one I wouldn't hesitate. Glad to see Tamron entered the game. Hope to see much more from them. Yeah, that's all I've got for you. Thanks for coming along. I hope you have a wonderful new year. I hope your 2022 is amazing in every way and that you're safe and happy and healthy, and that most importantly, you find a way to do some good with your camera. But until next time, yeah. How do I end these videos again?